All Fire, No Smoke is our candid conversation as two military aviators sharing the unique experiences we've had in combat, reconnaissance, and demonstration flying.
Through personal stories, technical details, and laughter, we explore the challenges of balancing leadership, motherhood, professional life, all while offering inspiring insights for those who are trying to strike that work-life balance.
I wanted to ask you a question. You're talking to these girls and you're talking to people, and you said sometimes you're at this point where you got a 17-year-old, 18-year-old about to go live their best life and go forward, and you see how things are, and you tell them, hey, this is the current situation, the environment. I love the fact that you're authentic about that because I do the same thing. I say, hey, guys, AI is here. Things are changing so quickly. You have to be ready and flexible and dynamic in this environment and just pay attention of what's going on. How does being authentic, especially when you were going in the Thunderbirds, and in the rest of your life to Colonel and beyond, how has that played a role for you in leading people and inspiring people and uplifting people?
Well, I mean, I think people connect with authenticity. Authenticity resonates with people. We all know someone who is standing up there and being fake, right? Whether they're just, reciting the company line or they're holding back a certain part of themselves. And we don't like it, right? It rubs people the wrong way. And so if you really want to be, I think, a good leader and you really want to have impact, you have to be willing to embrace the vulnerability that comes with being authentic. I think we talk a lot in this terms of, oh, you need to be authentic, you need to be yourself. And we really need to talk about what has to happen first, which is your willingness to be vulnerable, right? Because none of us are perfect. And so growing the confidence to know that, you're a human being, this is who you are, embrace your strengths, try to find people who can, help you with whatever your weaknesses are and just accept who you are. And, as a leader, when you're vulnerable and you're authentic, you're actually modeling the behavior you want to see in your team, right? I mean, don't we stand up there as leaders and say, if you need help, let us know. If you've got a question, don't be afraid to ask. If you want to improve on something, let me know. When we don't do it ourselves as leaders, right? That's
Yeah.
that's just fake. It's inauthentic. And by modeling that behavior, you're actually going to bring out, I think, the bigger strengths and probably even hidden strengths, that are amongst your team. And the other important part about authenticity and vulnerability and knowing who you are is that when challenges arrive, when life comes at you unexpectedly, right? For example, my totally unexpected medical retirement due to a brain infection, um, you're sometimes are going to be the only person you got, right? And so take the time now to learn who you are. Take the time now to love who you are, because when the shit hits the fan, you need to be there for yourself, right? And you need to have that support system around you that loves you for who you are, authentically. And I learned that kind of the hard way, through my illness. One of the things I talk to people a lot about is I ask, what are your personal values? We joined the Air Force and we put on that uniform and we bought into the core values of the Air Force. Good ones, right? Service before self, excellence in all we do, integrity first. And those are all great. But what are your personal values? And I really had never thought about that prior to almost dying from a brain infection and losing everything, right? My identity, my career, my profession. And I found in the last, 10 years since that being bedridden that I wake up every morning and I go over my personal values. They're aspirational. I'm still human. I am imperfect. They're my goals for the day. I try to filter every action, decision, and behavior through these three values. And I find that people who have that and know their authentic values and why they do what they do and who they are and why they prioritize things are able to navigate hardship and change and turbulence, a lot smoother and a lot more efficient. So the 3 C's of Nicole Malachowski are compassion, courage, and curiosity.
I I love that, but I do have a question, the vulnerability part. So
Yeah.
I didn't know, I knew you had the tick-borne illness, but I didn't know there was a brain disease involved in that.
Yeah.
So during that time, Did you feel, because I know through isolation as a U-2 pilot flying alone for many hours, you
Mm.
get to see yourself and you get to talk to yourself in ways that are just real. Can you explain or give the audience a little bit of what that was like
Oh yeah.
during those moments, and what did you go through a little bit, and how that made you 10 times stronger on the other side?
Sure, sure. So just for a little bit of context, for the listeners, I did get bit by a tick. It went misdiagnosed too long to the point that it broke through the blood-brain barrier and eventually impacted my brainstem. Big picture, I was bedridden for 2 years. For the first 9 months of it, I couldn't walk, talk, read, and write. And for the last remainder year and a half or so, I was in therapy learning to walk, talk, read, and write again. So that was my last 2 years, in the Air Force, bedridden and housebound. And the date of my military retirement was 29 December 2017. I was home alone. To this day, I've never had a retirement ceremony. I remember on that day, nobody from the Air Force called. And in fact, some of my retirement certificates and stuff were actually mailed to me in a manila folder, right? Like, thank you for your service. So I have to put that context in there because that was a very dark moment for me, a very low moment, right? There was indeed feelings, of abandonment and betrayal and who am I if I'm not wearing my nation's uniform? What's my contribution to society if I'm not a fighter pilot? How am I going to provide for my family? I have all these complex chronic symptoms, that I still actually live with to this day. Who's going to hire me? What am I going to do? And, started the part of this grief cycle. And I think it's okay to cry and be sad and be angry and frustrated. And I allowed myself that moment authentically. I'd always kept the stiff upper lip, right? I'd always tried, to blend in, to be strong, to have that fighter pilot mask that we were raised to do. But that was not serving me well in that moment at all because it wasn't going to change anything. And so, it was one of the first times in my life that I broke down and sobbed, like flat out, sobbing into, a pillow. And it was in that moment that I realized, my legacy isn't to be a great fighter pilot or to become a general someday. It's about the impact that I can still have. I still have, a big life in front of me. So who are you and what is it you want to do? And it occurred to me like, it's not the flying that I was going to miss at all. I was going to miss being a part of a team, right? I was going to miss leading airmen. And so I knew I had to reinvent myself in a way that would fill that gap in my heart. And by doing the consulting and the speaking and the kind of team development work I do today with corporate America, very selfishly, it fills that authentic need, that I have in my heart for needing to be part of something bigger than myself or needing to be part of something, that's a team. I hope that makes sense.
It makes very much sense. Thank you so much for sharing that, and I appreciate that because I think a lot of people right now are going through those transitions
Mm.
alone, and they feel, just isolated in this void, and they don't know what's going to happen next. And just to know that there is a process to that, and you have to be honest with yourself. You have to understand yourself, and it's okay to break down and cry and have those moments.
Yeah.
But you kind of rethought, what did I really want to do in life? And you kind of reinvented yourself. You had
Yeah.
that mindset. So it is possible out there for everyone to do so. It is
I
difficult.
believe, yeah, everyone has the power to reinvent themselves at any given time. And I hope my story proves that. I realized I was asking myself the wrong questions. I was saying the wrong things. It's not what you can't do anymore with all the bad symptoms you have. The right question is, what is it that you have right now that can help you move forward? Because the runway behind you is unusable, Nicole, right? You've only got the runway in front of you. So start asking yourself the right questions. And it occurred to me that all the traits that I had honed as a fighter pilot, right? Commitment, discipline, grit, courage, resilience, confidence. Those were all things that I needed to survive my illness, to advocate for myself as a patient, and to reinvent myself into what I did today. So, in fact, my legacy was never to be a fighter pilot or a general someday. My legacy is ongoing, right? I think I impact more people on a grander scale more quickly doing what I do now than if I had ever stayed in the Air Force. And so being at those dark depths really gives you clarity of purpose. And I didn't know what to do. I didn't know what I was going to reinvent myself as. And I came across, I want to share with you guys, the Japanese philosophy called Ikigai, Ikigai. I'm probably pronouncing it wrong. And I'm going to give a very basic Western view of a very complex, beautiful Japanese tradition. So I want to honor and respect that. But it's all about finding your purpose in life, because I felt purposeless, right? I was rudderless. I mean, I can't go fly for the airlines. What am I supposed to go do? And Ikigai is an intersection of answer to 4 questions. Something you're good at, something you love, something you can get paid for, and something the world needs. And where those 4 things interact is where I found my next purpose and how I reinvented myself.
I love it. Dude, if our listeners are not motivated now, just go somewhere and come back. Because this is like these are the golden nuggets right now that everyone should be listening to. So thank you so much for sharing that. I love it.
I was when I was doing the Ikigai for myself, studying up on it and learning about it, because it connected with me, and I was like, this is how I'm going to find my way out. Ikigai is going to help me find my way out. The one circle I was stuck on is, what are you good at? I couldn't answer that because I kept seeing myself as just a fighter pilot. Well, I'm just a fighter pilot. I can't pass an FAA medical exam, so I can't go fly for the airlines. What am I good at? And the way I broke through that finally was I started to ask the people that knew me best, what do you think I'm good at? Right? My husband, my family, my really close friends. And they started pointing out things I had never seen or that I had never even considered. And in fact, they were right. And so that was the part of the Ikigai circle that I was stuck on. And that's how I found my way kind of through that. The people that know you best, which brings up the importance, right, of nurturing that support system consistently and constantly across your life and your career.
You know what? It always has to be an Air Force person messing it up.
That's right. Air Force. My chair pulls 9Gs and does like Mach 2, so whatever. No, at Tailhook, so I'm thinking a lot about the Blue Angels versus Thunderbird stuff, and from an organizational standpoint, why do you think it took the Blue Angels so long to have a female demonstration F-18 pilot?
Yeah, I've been asked this, a lot. So first of all, kudos to Amanda Lee for being the first
Woo-hoo!
F-18 demonstration pilot.
Go shipmate.
Let's not forget, right, that Fat Albert did in fact have a female pilot before, but Amanda Lee absolutely crushed it. My short answer is the Navy was waiting for the right officer, leader, and pilot to come along, and she was the one to do it. More practically, right, the fact of the matter is that there's going to be fewer fighter pilots in the Navy than in the Air Force. They traditionally have fewer women in that role, so. You also, Blaze, very well know that this has to hit at a very specific time, during your actual career itself, as far as your career timeline. So I think there were kind of 3 practical things there that made it a little bit more difficult for the Navy and Marine Corps to have a Blue Angels pilot. But I like to think that fate had its way. They were just waiting for the right person. And I think Amanda Lee nailed it.
For sure. I had some good interactions with some of the pilots on the team when I was there, and their boss had reached out to me to do some mentorship for one of the women applicants. But like you said, I think it has to be the right time, the right person, and all those circumstances has to fall into place. But it was interesting seeing the organizational change between the Navy and the Air Force and the Blue Angels and the Thunderbirds, and even kind of watching the recent movies that came out with the Netflix. I think just the differences between the organizations that do, very, very similar things is really fascinating.
Yeah, absolutely. And, the other thing we got to think about is, the person has to want to do it. Blaze, you know very well that it is not easy to be a Thunderbird or a Blue Angel. It is an extremely demanding job, not just the flying, but all of the extra stuff, right? People don't realize that we do all of our own mission planning. We do all of our training and evaluation. We still have to do all the other administrative stuff that any pilot, has. And then, you're on the road 5 days a week, 10 months out of the year. It's a huge commitment, and not everybody wants to do that. So I think that's another layer that's, got to be added in.
All right, Blaze, are you going to ask the question at the end? Because we were talking about vulnerability. We haven't gotten to call signs. That's the thing right now, and how
my call sign story is super off color. I will tell you a lighter
let's get
version
off color.
Okay. Well, someone has to ask me then, because you got to let me tell the funny part of this story, which is at the very end. Okay, go ahead.
Blaze,
we've started talking a lot about call signs, and Meryl's doing some call signs on her social media and it's getting a lot of great interaction. So, um, Nicole Fifi Malachowski, how did you get your call sign?
All right, I've never publicly told this story, so here you go. Here you go. So imagine, it's the late '90s. You're at your very first fighter squadron as a young lieutenant. You're a young woman entering into the fighter community. What, 23 years old, 23 pounds lighter, right? I walk into the squadron. The dudes are like, what is this? Is she strong enough? Is she confident enough? Is she going to ruin the bro code? Bro culture, how's this all going to go, kind of a thing. And, as you know, call signs are two things. One, it's a huge compliment to get a call sign because it means that your squadron's ready to take you to war, right? That you've trained up enough that they trust you to be on their wing, and there is no higher honor. And the second thing we know about call signs, it is always making fun of something you did, said, a mistake you made, all right? So I always tell people, don't let a fighter pilot fool you, right? I don't care if their call sign is Maverick or Killer. There is a funny story behind it. And so, as the story goes, we showed up fresh out of the B course, and there was nobody on base. We would soon find out that all of the pilots and planes were gone for what would eventually become Operation Allied Force, right? So Kosovo, Serbia. But we didn't know that at the time. So we basically sat around for several weeks, if not months, without flying. And that's when somebody realized, oh my gosh, if we don't get these new lieutenants that are back, at our home station through at least one EP sim and one flight in the next 3 weeks, they're going to have to go back through an entire new B course. Now, I don't know about you, but I barely made it through the first time. I do not want to go back through a whole nother darn B course to get qualified in the Strike Eagle. So they flew somebody home. The first thing we had was an emergency procedure simulator to kind of recheck that square for a few months to buy time for this war, to kick off and move forward. And so I knew because I had read the Doofer book on the desk back when we had Doofer books on the ops desk that there were a lot of people wondering about the new gal that was coming into the squadron. And not all the words that were in that book were complimentary. And no, I was not supposed to have seen any of that. So I had a little bit of weight, on my shoulder. I'm 23 years old. I'm inexperienced, and I go into this emergency procedure simulator and I'm like, I'm going to nail it. I am going to just follow every checklist. I'm not going to mess a single thing up, because I don't want to give anybody, opportunity to say anything. So back then, Strike Eagle simulators, totally blacked out, canopy comes down. There's no visual like there is today. There's no movement like there is today. All you had was the teeny weeny HUD, right? So we make it through all the bet you can't start, bet you can't taxi, emergency, right? Engine fire, whatever. We get out to the end of the runway. I'm looking through the HUD. I'm like, all right, pre-takeoff checklist. So I look down at my checklist. I'm reading through it, parking brake on, ejection seat armed. And when I look up into the HUD, they had failed my brakes forever ago. And I am literally going through virtual reality buildings. I had taxied off the runway. I am taxiing through runways.
Classic.
And I was so mad at myself. My first opportunity in this squadron, my first time to shine, my first time to show that I belonged. And I had screwed up royally. So I had to shut off the engines and emergency ground egress, which is what you would do if you departed a prepared surface, right? And as I'm opening the canopy, I'm just yelling out loud. I'm so mad at myself. I'm like, I'm an idiot. And I forgot that everything I'm saying is not only going to the cockpit, but it's going to the entire room, the console, the simulator, the guy, the instructor pilot. He goes, oh, what? And I go, a idiot. Well, the vice wing commander was also in there, and they were giving a tour, and there were some Cub Scouts in there. And next thing you know, they're like, wow, she's an idiot. So Fifi actually stands for fucking idiot. But here's the great part of the story. The second part during the naming ceremony was, you came in this kind of really petite 23-year-old young gal. You're kind of like this cute little poodle, but if people bend down to pet you, you'll attack. So there's kind of like this double entendre. You're our Fifi. Fast forward 2005, get picked to be a Thunderbird pilot, get sent to the Pentagon for my extra dose of media training that nobody else on the team had to do, the extra media training. And they said, well, CNN's going to want to know your call sign. Tell us the story. I'm like, well, it's off color. They're like, tell us the story. So I tell them the whole story. At the end of it, all of the public affairs people, their jaws were like, and they looked at me straight in the face. They're like, This is exactly what they said. We can't tell that story. We have to come up with a cover story. So this is your taxpayers' dollars hard at work, right? So that's when it all hit us. That's when it hit us. So when CNN asked me, why is your call sign Fifi? My answer was always, well, in World War II, we had America's
right.
first women military aviators, the Women Air Force Service Pilots, and their squadron patch and mascot, which was drawn for them by Walt Disney himself. Sorry about that. It was actually a little Tinkerbell fairy, you know, with leather flying goggles, a flying scarf, and her name was Fifi. So, CNN, my call sign harkens back to the legacy of America's first women military aviators.
Oh my gosh, that's hysterical.
And it really
Oh
does. And I think a
man.
lot of people think that Fifi is short for Fifinella, which if you're watching this is right over my head here
There
at my
she
friend's
is.
house. But you are such a great testament, even though it comes from a really funny story. And man, those poor Boy Scouts, they're probably all fighter pilots today too. Talking about how cool it was
Oh,
that someone was so vulnerable with them. But thank you for being really vulnerable with us here today.
And let's give a shout out, right? Let's do the shout out right now. You know, General Steve Goldfein was the Air Force, what is it, Warfare Center commander at the time,
Yeah.
who made the official, you know, pick of me. I'm actually talking to him next week. We're still in touch. And let's give a shout out to General Ron Keyes, right? He was the commander of Air Combat Command at that time. Because the fact of the matter is that I know for a fact those two gentlemen took a rash of shit for picking the first woman Thunderbird pilot. There were a lot of their contemporary male fighter pilots who told them, don't do it, man. And they did it anyways. And so when I talk about the Air Force being full of a lot of great and supportive men, General Goldfein and General Keyes are two of those guys.
Yeah, let's just give a total shout out to all the allies out there, because we
That's right.
all had those in our
Yeah.
careers and in our lives that have helped us and navigate and avoid some real big pitfalls that some people had it out for us. So
And
yeah.
that's a fantastic note to end on too, or to bring it to tie this up with. Definitely without the allies, like the people who speak up for you when you're not in the room,
Oh,
and
yeah.
the people who pick you for the jobs that nobody else wanted, or make sure that you get the awards, make sure you get the recognition, make sure you get the updates. I think when we go out and talk to other people who are thinking about, man, I want to follow in your footsteps, but what about today? That no matter what, those people are still there, and there's probably a lot more there today than there were 30 years ago. And so I do think you're in good hands when you decide to put on that uniform and swear your oath.
I agree.
Yeah.
I agree.
Well, with that, Nicole, Fifi, thank you so much for coming by. This was fun. This was great. I loved it. Loved
The
it so much.
pleasure was all mine. You are two icons and sheroes and role models to me. So thanks for the opportunity.
The views, thoughts, and opinions expressed by guests on All Fire No Smoke are their own and do not necessarily represent the views, thoughts, and opinions of the All Fire No Smoke production team, including hosts, producers, directors, and consultants. The content presented here is for entertainment and general information purposes only. The All Fire No Smoke name, trademark, and logos, and all forms of content are the property of its owners, and its use does not imply endorsement of or opposition to any specific organization, product, or service, and cannot be used without the express written consent of All Fire No Smoke.